was just a father and son on a camping trip. I thought we were a father and son on a camping trip. Oh no, said my father. That was just a cover. A cover. Well, you were really my son, admitted my father. I'm glad to hear it, I said. But we weren't purely on a father and son camping trip, he said. No, I said, a little bitterly. Apparently we were tracking terrorists. My father nodded happily. Was it not a bit dangerous? Asked my wife. What if you'd actually run into trouble? Oh, we were fine, said my father. I was armed. You had a gun, I said. Again, my father nodded happily. In a shoulder holster. What type of gun? Asked my wife, whose hippie parents wouldn't let her play with toy guns and who will, certainly as a consequence, end up killing someone with a gun. I didn't wait for an answer. I could have been killed, I cried. But nothing happened, said my wife, and looking at my father, right? Nothing happened, said my father, but he had a mysterious look on his face that led me to picture him drowning an IRA man in the brook as 12-year-old me slept soundly nearby. I wouldn't put it past him. I'd like to say, said my mother, that I had no idea this was going on. For a while there, my siblings and I called my mother Carmela, after Carmela Soprano. She often, in retrospect, turns out conveniently not to have had any idea what was going on when we were younger. In reality, I suspect that, like Carmela Soprano, she could quite capably run my father's enterprises if left to her own devices. In this instance, child-inclusive counter-terrorism, she was probably pleased to have a quiet house for the weekend and thought the off chance her son might be involved in a paramilitary gunfight was a risk worth taking. Childcare standards were different in the 1980s, as people repeatedly remind me. There was no helicopter parenting back then, unless my father was planning to call in a helicopter gunship for backup. But no, apparently the Ranger Wing didn't have access to a helicopter gunship at this time. I asked. I shouldn't have been too surprised by all this. I had a militarized childhood. When I was a boy, my mother and father and my younger sister and brother moved to the Curragh camp. This was the main training centre for the Irish Army, a 19th century base built by the British out of red bricks on a mineral-rich glacial plain. Queen Victoria inspected the troops there in 1861, but 60 years after independence it was filled with Irish soldiers and their families. There was a big water tower, 2 churches for 2 denominations, a just short of Olympic-length swimming pool, an old red brick hospital, a cinema where I saw Jaws 3D, many now ornamental, rusted-up tanks, and 7 army barracks, renamed after handover from the British in honour of the signatories of the 1916 proclamation. Soldiers lived in barracks dormitories, terraced houses, and new estates on the edge of the camp. Officers lived in bigger, grander houses. As an officer's family, we lived in a red brick 4-bedroom house with lino floors, a big Aga stove in the kitchen, bats in the chimney, and no central heating. This was, sadly, in an era before Aga stoves were considered chic, before bats in the chimney were considered chic, and when having central heating was considered very chic indeed. Some of the officers' houses were bigger than others. One family lived in a 7-bedroom house so big that it had servants' quarters and a separate servants' stairs. Even then, I thought that if I ever had a house with servants' quarters, it would be a shame not to get a few servants to go with it. That particular family did not have servants, which I thought showed a failure of imagination. I didn't have friends for a significant period after we moved to the Curragh camp, and spent my days cycling around by myself, climbing over the old rusted machines and getting into derelict buildings to loot any defunct military equipment I could find. I would collect bullet shells in the firing ranges and had plastic bags full of them in my wardrobe. I was so lonely I once ignored the red warning flags that indicated the firing range was in use in order to keep walking towards a frantically waving, out-of-breath soldier. The shocking thing about this for some of my angry neighbours was that a number of younger children followed after me, lion cubs led by a donkey. I think my mother felt similarly out of place when we lived there. Our household had a copy of The Second Sex, and my father and mother shared the breadwinning, cooking and cleaning duties. My dad might have been capable of killing a man with his bare hands, but he could also make an excellent queen cake with the same bare hands, and he probably even washed them in between. Meanwhile, my mother discovered that army wives were referred to in correspondence by their husband's rank, and many didn't have bank accounts and spent their